all parties agreed that now was the moment to accelerate the pace of these negotiations. In the Prime Minister's words, to put a tiger in the tank. The three presidents welcomed the Prime Minister's call for greater pace, focus and flexibility in the negotiations, and the tempo of the talks process has now been escalated. I'm pleased to say that both sides pledged yesterday, in a joint statement which was made public immediately afterwards, that they would intensify the talks in July and, if possible, seek to find an early understanding on the principles underlying any agreement. Our respective chief negotiators and their teams will therefore intensify talks from the end of this month, starting on June the 29th. I also welcome the Commission President's statement yesterday that the EU is available 24/7, and we will be too.
Michael Gove updated the Commons after the Prime Minister held video talks with EU leaders on the 15th of June, hoping to drive fresh impetus into trade talks between the sides, with the UK government wanting to have a deal agreed as soon as possible. Richard Whitman, Professor of Politics and International Relations at the University of Kent, talks through the process of getting this done.
The UK and the EU have got the end of this year to do the negotiations, but a bit of wiggle to extend the negotiating time if they wanted to, and they could do that for up to 2 years. But they'd have to make the decision by July, and really it means that if they don't make a decision this week or next week, then the negotiations have to finish by the end of this year. So that really creates a ticking clock, but a ticking clock in a context in which, obviously because of the pandemic, the normal way of doing negotiations face-to-face has been restricted. One is the kind of mechanics of doing the negotiations, because some of the negotiations were cancelled because both the EU negotiator, Mr. Barnier, and also the UK negotiator, David Frost, both had COVID-19, so they were both knocked out for a while, which meant you lost some momentum in the negotiations. But really the fundamental issue is that what most commentators thought the negotiations were going to focus on, which were part of the so-called political declaration that was agreed alongside the withdrawal agreement to take the UK out of the EU. The Johnson government has really taken a different view on what it wants to achieve in the negotiations from what the EU thinks it's signed up for. So in many ways, you've had both sides talking past one another, with the EU side saying, look, this is what the deal we thought we were looking for. And the British government side saying, well, that was a kind of guideline as to what we might aspire to do rather than a roadmap.
Full border checks on imports to Great Britain will no longer be immediately introduced on January the 1st after Michael Gove chaired an EU joint committee. But Professor Whitman says this will have an impact across both sides.
Basically going to eliminate the checks, or to defer checks and defer payments on imports for months into 2021. From the EU side, they've been pretty adamant so far that they're not going to do any kind of easing on the EU side. So you could have a situation in which the UK decides, sort of waive checks, barriers and so on, makes it pretty easy to move goods and people into the UK from the other side of the channel. But UK goods and people going the other way are going to be delayed, which could then have a knock-on effect on parts of the UK, and particularly Kent. So you could have a sort of different effect or different impact on both sides of the channel if the EU keeps to the line that it's going to impose those checks straight away.
With Brexit negotiations now trying to get a deal by July, Professor Whitman explains the impact if no agreement is reached.
It's going to be a bit different from when we spoke about no-deal Brexit in the past, because the no-deal Brexit in the past was about not reaching an agreement on the terms in which the UK left the EU, which would have been, I think, more difficult for the EU to cope with, arguably, than the UK. The difference now is that we've already seen the change, in the sense the UK has left the institutions, it's not part of EU decision-making and so on. But it's probably going to impinge much more on ordinary people, because this year, 2020, really everything stays the same in effect. If you're trading, if you're moving across the EU borders and so on. If you have a no-deal situation, then you will, in effect, have both sides putting in place mitigation measures to try and deal with dislocation in the absence of clear rules, or falling back on rules. For example, on road transport that allow much less freedom of movement for lorries, for example, than you've got now, and quite possibly more stringent checks on UK national travelling over to the continent.